All right, so we already briefly mentioned in chapter 4 that parallel lines are two lines that never cross, and they have the same what? Slope. Okay? So two lines have the same slope, but they never intersect each other or parallel to each other. So what's going to happen today is that we're going to talk about two different lines. Okay? For the first line, they're just going to give us 1 point that's on that line. And for the second line, they're going to tell us the equation to that line. So this is two separate lines right here. It says write an equation of a line that goes through the point -3, -5, and is parallel to the line y equals 3x minus 1. So this is two separate lines. One line goes through this point, okay? And one line has the equation y equals 3x minus 1. This is not the equation to this line. And this point is not on this line. Does that make sense? For two different lines that we're comparing. All right? So we have the equation to the second line. We need the equation to the first line that goes through the point -3, -5. Does that make sense? So what two things do we need to write the equation of the line? Slope and y-intercept, correct? So, do we know the slope of the second line?
Yes.
What is their slope?
3/1.
It's 3, right? How do we know their slope is 3? It's in slope-intercept form, right? And the slope is in the M spot. So their slope is 3. And if our line needs to be parallel to their line, what does our slope need to be? Yeah, because parallel lines have what? The same slope. So if their slope is 3, then our slope will also be 3. Correct? So that's easy. Our slope needs to be 3 also. So what other thing besides the slope do I need to write the equation of a line? I need B. So how do we get B again? We did it on Friday. Plug in the ordered pair and the slope into y equals mx plus b. Okay, so I'm using the point -3, -5. So what goes in for y? -5. What goes in for m? 3 for the slope. What goes in for the x? -3. My handwriting is sloppy. And what's 3 times -3? So -5 equals -9 plus b. I add the 9 to both sides, and b equals what, y'all? 4. So I've got m, and I've got b. So what's the equation of my line? Y equals 3x plus 4. So if we know that lines are supposed to be parallel to each other, and I know one slope, then we know what our slope needs to be. Does that make sense? And then we can just double check and make sure their slope is 3, my slope is 3. They have the same slope. So sometimes we get mixed up and put the B in the M spot and the M in the B spot, so that way we can just double check and make sure we have the same number in the slope spot. Any questions? Is that difficult? Not too bad. We did some a lot harder than that Friday, I thought. All right, new problem. This time we want the equation of a line that goes through the point 4, 6 that is parallel to the line 2y equals 5x plus 6. Is their equation in slope-intercept form?
No.
No. So before we can tell what their slope is, we've got to put their equation in slope-intercept form. So anytime today when we're working any of these and on your homework, if you don't have a slope-intercept form for you to tell what the slope is, that's what you need to do first. So what do we have to do on this one to get it in slope-intercept form? Divide by 2 by all the terms. So y equals what when we simplify? 5/2x plus 3. So there's their equation in slope-intercept form. Y equals 5/2x plus 3. And what's their slope? 5/2. So if their slope is 5/2, And our line needs to be parallel to that line. What does our slope need to be? 5 over 2. And we're not going to cry over a fraction, y'all. It's going to work out okay. So same thing. I've got m. I've got an x and y. So I'm going to plug them into y equals mx plus b. And what goes in for y? 6 equals what goes in for m? 5 over 2. And what goes in for x? 4 plus b. What's 5 over 2 times 4? 10. And y'all can do any of those little math tricks you want to. Top times big divided by bottom. 5 times 4 is 20 divided by 2 is 10. Is one way you can think about it. And then how do I solve it for b? Subtract 10. What's 6 minus 10? Negative 4. Got m and I have b. So what's the equation of our line in slope-intercept form?
Y equals 5 over 2x.
Yes, y equals 5 over 2x minus 4. Any questions about this problem? Yes, sir. No. Not today. Another way is if this was over 1, these two would cancel out and put a 2 on top. 5 times 2 is 10. So there's a couple ways you can think about them. Any other questions? All right, you guys are going to try this one. When you get your equation, can you check it with the neighbor? The time is 10:22 a.m. As you're wondering. Bugging me not having a clock. So we've spent a whole whopping 10 minutes on a lesson. All right. So what is their equation in slope-intercept form?
No, yeah.
Yeah, it is. What is their slope?
1. Negative 1.
Their slope is -1. Did everybody figure that out okay? Okay, so if their slope is -1 and our line needs to be parallel to their line, what does our slope need to be?
-1.
Good. Okay, so y equals mx plus b. What goes in for y?
11.
What goes in for m?
-1.
X. What's -1 times -2?
2.
And then you subtracted 2, and what did you get for b?
9.
So what's your equation?
Y equals -1x plus 9.
If I write negative x, is that the same thing as negative 1x?
Yeah.
Yes. So if you got this or you got negative 1x plus 9, raise your hand. Any questions on how we do parallel line equations? All right. So next we're going to talk about perpendicular lines. Now, parallel lines are the only kinds of lines that never intersect each other, correct?
Yeah.
Every other pair of lines is eventually going to cross each other. Every other kind. All right? So parallel lines are the only ones that do not intersect. Now, perpendicular lines are special because they cross, but when they cross, they form 90-degree angles. Okay? So all pairs of lines will cross except for parallel, and perpendicular lines are special pairs that cross to make 90-degree angles. And their slopes are not the same, obviously, because if their slopes are the same, they would be parallel to each other. But their slopes are also special because they are negative reciprocals of each other. Now, the book uses the term negative reciprocals. I like the term opposite reciprocals better because it could be a positive slope. So people think negative reciprocal has to be a negative slope. It doesn't have to be. It's whatever the opposite of the original was. Okay? So let's talk about a negative reciprocal. What does reciprocal mean when we're talking about fractions? Right, the numerator becomes the denominator and the denominator becomes the numerator, right? It's inverted. All right, so we make the fraction into a reciprocal and then we change the sign to make it an opposite reciprocal. So let's just practice that for a second. Say we have the slope negative 6/7. What is the opposite reciprocal of negative 6/7?
7/6.
Positive 7/6. We flip it and change the sign. Okay, so if you want to put that in parentheses, flip and change sign. Sometimes a different wording helps us. So you flip it and you change the sign. So let's practice with a whole number. Say we have, let's do 5. What do you think is the opposite reciprocal of 5?
-1.
Where do you get the 1 from?
100.
That's right. Whole numbers, we can put a 1 underneath it, swap the fraction, flip it, and change the sign. I get -1/5. Does that make sense? Is everybody okay with how we get an opposite reciprocal? You flip it and you change the sign. Bless you. All right. So just like we did for parallel lines, we're going to do the same thing for perpendicular lines. Except for we don't want the same slopes. We want opposite reciprocal slopes. And the same thing again for equations of lines. We want an M and we want a B. And after we get that, we can get our equation. So this time, on this problem, we want the equation of a line that goes through the point 4, -5. That is perpendicular to the line y equals 2x plus 3. Again, first things first, we need this equation in slope-intercept form, okay? So is this equation in slope-intercept form?
Yes.
Yes. What is their slope?
2.
Their slope is 2. So if their slope is 2, and we want this line to be perpendicular, then what does our slope need to be?
-1.
Yeah, put a 1 underneath, flip it, change the sign. Our slope needs to be a -1/2. Are there any questions about why I'm going to use -1/2? Please sit up, take notes. Any questions about that? Okay, so now we get our B. We're going to use this ordered pair. What goes in for Y?
-5.
Equals -1/2 times what's X?
4.
What's -1/2 times 4? -2. So I add 2 to both sides. And what do I get for B? -3. So here's M, here's B. What's my equation? Good. And again, the slopes should be negative reciprocals of each other. Any questions on this one? All right. Next one. All right, this time we want to go through the point 4, -2, and be perpendicular to the line y equals 1/3 x minus 5. So this one's in slope-intercept form already. Okay, so what is their slope?
1/3.
Their slope is 1/3. So if we're perpendicular to that line, what is our line's slope?
-3.
A -3. Any questions about how we get -3? We flip it, we get 3/1, which is 3. Change the sign, we get -3. So just flip it and change the sign. All right, so y equals mx plus b. What goes in for y?
-2.
What's m? X. Okay, so I have -2. 12 plus b. On both sides. -2 plus 12 is. And so what's our equation this time? -3x plus 10. And then double check and make sure you have opposite reciprocal slopes. And you do. So if we don't put the slope correctly, are you going to get your B correct?
No.
No. So you got to be careful when you're flipping and changing signs, okay? All right, y'all get to try this one for perpendicular. So everybody work this one on your paper. All right, when you get your equation done, check it with a neighbor. If not, keep working. All right, what's their equation? Is it in slope-intercept form?
Yeah.
What's their slope of their line?
1/2.
a half. And our line needs to be perpendicular, so what does our slope need to be?
-2.
Is everybody okay with the slope being -2?
Yeah.
Make sure you get your slope right or nothing else will be right. So what goes in for y?
6
Equals
-2
times
8
plus b. What's -2 times 8?
-16.
Whoops. And then I do what?
Add 16 on both sides.
And then I'm glad I'm not graphing it, because what is 6 plus 16?
22.
That would go off of my screen. So what is my equation of this line?
Y equals -2x plus 22.
All right, raise your hand if you got y equals -2x plus 22. Any questions about perpendicular lines? So the last thing we're going to do in this lesson is we're going to compare two different lines, or three lines. And we're going to see if any of them are parallel to each other or perpendicular to each other. So they give us three equations of three different lines. And we have to say if any of them are parallel to each other or perpendicular to each other. So how do you suppose we're going to do this? How are we going to know if they're parallel or perpendicular to each other?
It's gonna work.
What do you mean by work them all out? Get them in slope-intercept form. Why do we want to get them in slope-intercept form?
So you can compare their slopes.
So I can compare their slopes. Yes, it's easy to see their slopes if they're in slope-intercept form. So line A is our friend. Why is line A our friend?
It's already in slope.
It's already in slope-intercept form. So what is the slope of line A?
5.
Their slope is 5. And I didn't have to do any work to line A. Thank you, line A. But line B, we got to do a little work. So we got to make that one look like y equals mx plus b, which means we have to solve it for y. Get y by itself. So what are we going to do first to line B?
Subtract x.
So I'm going to write 5y equals -1x plus 2. Because when I divide in a second, it's easier if I have a number in top. And then what do I do to get y by itself? Divide everything by 5. So y equals -1/5 x plus 2/5, all simplified. So what is the slope of line B?
-5.
Try again. What's the slope of line B?
Oh, -1/5.
-1/5. Okay. So look at line A and line B's slope. Can we compare them somehow? What can we say about line A and line B? They're perpendicular to each other. How do I know they're perpendicular to each other?
Opposite.
Yeah, if I do the opposite reciprocal, I get from one to the other, don't I? Okay, so I can say that line A, or I'll just say lines A and B are perpendicular. Now, guys, when you do your homework on these, I think you got like 3 of these to do. It could be that you only have one comparison to make, that you have one set of parallel lines, one set of perpendicular lines. Or you could have some that you could have slopes 1, 2, and 3, and they have no relationship to each other. Okay, so it could be that there's no parallel perpendicular relationship at all. Okay, so this is just going to be a special example when you got a few different things going on. I'm just going to go ahead and hint to you on that one. So don't do line A and B and see that they have a relationship and skip out line C, because line C might be parallel to one, it might be perpendicular. You don't know until you work it out. So what are we going to have to do to line C over here to get it in slope-intercept form? Add 2x. I need everybody's heads up and paying attention. This is the last time I'm going to say it. And now what? Divide by -10 everywhere. And simplify that. Y equals what? -1/5 x. And this one is one that's going through the origin, isn't it? Yep. So what is the slope of that line? negative 1/5. So let's compare that to lines A and lines B. I got a few things I can say. What's something else I can say? A and C are also perpendicular. Can I make any other comparisons? Yes, they have the same slope as each other, so lines B and C are parallel. All right, so like I said on your homework, get them all in slope-intercept form, check their slopes, compare them. You might only have one relationship you can say out of all three lines. You might not have any relationships you can say out of all three lines. Okay? So that is the end of section 5.5.